And I'll throw that back over to you. How do you make that shift? Because that inertia is going to be the big problem for a lot of businesses.
I think as a leader, you just have to make that decision and state it. This is what we're going to do. Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And bingo, 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 because that was all memory. I was rehearsing it in my head up until the point that we hit, record. I still almost messed it up. It's funny how our minds can jump all over things like that. Even though you say, this is what I'm going to say, when you get to that point, your mind can say, no, that's not what you're going to say. We're going to talk about this, or what about that? Or when you're watching us on YouTube today, you'll also notice that I'm not in the office, so I've got lots of distractors. I'm at a hotel in South Carolina, and I've got a pool behind me with a couple of kids swimming, and I've got a conference room inside in front of me. So, you want to talk about distractions. Who knows what's going to happen while we're recording this show? Maybe one of the kids will do a big giant cannonball, and you'll see a splash come up over me. So,
I hope so. That would be pretty entertaining.
Yeah, that might make a Cam and Otis show blooper reel, right? Right up there with.
I was gonna say that's the YouTube hook stuff, right? We're talking algorithm things. Come on, we're in the first couple minutes here, folks. Stay tuned. There might be a kid jumping in a pool. There you go.
There you go.
Otis might get splashed.
Yeah, I don't know if I can compete with Jason running back to the rail. I mean, I could do that here at the pool and run to the other side of the pool and show you that, like Jason did. It's not a fake background, folks.
Yes, sir. I don't know if we got time for that, though.
Yeah. Well, yeah, me running. You thought Jason ran slow, folks. Wait till you see me.
Oh, yeah.
And it just gets me to thinking on, what we were going to talk about today, and that's meetings. I always find it ironic that people, and I was going to say business, but it's everybody, right? Whether you're in church, the military, business, some nonprofit organization, everybody talks about meetings with disdain, how much they dislike meetings and how much of a burden it is and all these sort of things. And it's ironic because meetings is how you coordinate things so that you work together as a team, and they shouldn't be a burden. Now, the problem happens is when you have meetings after meetings after meetings, or also meetings to have meetings. That was one of the jokes we used to have in the military all the time, is we got to have a meeting to coordinate the meeting. And,
right.
There's a little bit of truth to that, but it all comes down to, well, what's your process? What's your system? What's your standard operating procedures? And I think that's the key to making sure your meetings are efficient. Meetings should not be show up and talk. They should be, here's what we want to accomplish during this meeting. Mm-hmm. So I know you haven't been in the big corporate world, so I want to get your outside of corporate world perception.
Yeah, I think there's this really interesting thing, which is like when you're the one calling the meeting, it's like, well, everyone needs to be there. Otis has to be there because I want to get his opinion on these things. And it's like you just want people there to hear your thoughts, to tell you that you have good ideas and all that kind of stuff, and to get that kind of feedback from the group, make sure everyone's on the same page. I think where the barrier comes then is like, that's what the leader, that's the person calling the meeting, that's what they're thinking, right? And then every single person in the meeting is thinking, I got so much stuff to do, I don't need to be thinking about this, and definitely doesn't need to take this much time and all that kind of stuff. That's where you kind of get this push and pull. It's a little bit of just this interesting, bias of like, well, I want to talk, and so I'm going to talk, and I want to chat with everybody, make sure we're all on the same page and that kind of stuff. But then when you're in the other seat, it's not like that at all. It's a waste of time. And I think you really hit the nail on the head that it's the repetition, it's the meeting when you don't need to be meeting, it's the meeting about meeting. And, just making things a longer, drawn out conversation for the sake of feedback that isn't part of the problem set. And what I mean by that is it's this idea of like, well, I want to make sure Otis understands the entire plan, gives me feedback on everything that we're talking about, make sure I get all the ideas out there and we can hash this all out, where you could also just review the plan over an email and go, yeah, no, that looks good. Like, it's like you don't really need to dive in on that level. I think of my good friend, of course, Coach Duffy with U of A. He'll talk about the bureaucracy at the U of A and stuff. People stop at him and was like, hey, I need to set a meeting. Okay, what about? Oh, because we need to talk about what's going on next Friday. Okay, what's going on next Friday? Okay, is that it? This is it then. Yeah, we're good. Cool, good. And you just move on. And it's like, because people want to sit and they want to have that flex space for all of the extra ideas, for the new insights, for the extra opinions, all that kind of stuff. The reality is most people don't have those all the time. And it's like you have to check your own bias a little bit of like, not everyone's going to have all of these ideas when it comes to something I'm working on. You really don't need that extra opinion when it comes to a lot of those things. And the other thing is a lot of those that you talk about, like the reason to have those meetings, those long meetings, and that extra stuff that you get out of it. I mean, and without completely changing the subject of today's conversation, Dad, but those extra opinions, that ideation process, well, that also is going to happen really well outside of that meeting. Because putting pressure on people to come up with ideas also isn't a very effective way to come up with ideas either. So I think just looking at it from that perspective of like, why do people keep going back to that? And then throwing it over to you, then what are some of the like actual like, call them like different types of meetings, different mechanisms, different tools that you've seen in the more, true bureaucratic world over there of how to get rid of those long drawn out meetings where everyone needs to be in there and we all need to be talking the whole time.
Well, there's a lot of techniques. And one thing I thought of, though, while you were talking that I want to touch on is there's a whole nother reason that people go to meetings is to show their value, that they're important enough to be included in the meeting, which is really ironic. And when you have people that are like that, you really need to start checking what's going on in your team. If you discover that somebody is showing up to meetings because they feel like they need to be included, then you're doing something wrong in your team. Nobody should ever feel like they need to be at all the meetings. It's the CC.
Do you think that's ego or trust?
I think it's
probably a little both.
Yeah, I mean, trust in the sense of do I have a job? Am I value added? I show my value added to the organization by sitting in all the meetings.
What if they scrap my project when I'm not there because I don't trust them? That kind of thing.
Right. And I chalk it up to the same thing as the boss who says, CC me on everything. Really? I mean, you're going to read every email? That's the boss not trusting his team to do the job. So there are different kinds of meetings, you can talk, go back to the military days, the training meeting. The whole idea of the training meeting is here's what we have planned for this week, here's what we have planned for next week, and here's what we have planned in 6 weeks. So it was near, the immediate, the near, and the semi-long-term, not true long-term. Mm-hmm. Then once a quarter, we would do quarterly training briefs where we would talk about what we're doing in the next 12 months sort of thing and looking out. In business, you can do the same thing. You can do a monthly or a weekly coordination meeting. Here's what we got planned for this week. Here's what I'm doing next week. Here's my gaps. Here's my early identified or suspected risk points. That's another great thing to talk about. And here's what I need help with. Here's what I might need help with, or here's what I definitely need help with. That's what you can do in meetings. There's a software development process that's called Scrum.
Mhm.
and why they grabbed a rugby term, because it doesn't make sense. Because what you do in a scrum in that sense is you're doing rapid development, spiral development is what you're
Mhm.
doing. And each day you do a stand up. And if you're doing scrum by the book, it's a true stand up. If you read the details of it, that meeting, that stand up meeting is in a small space and everybody is standing. It is truly a stand up meeting. There was some military leader, and I can't remember who it was, that used to do the same thing. Because you know what? If everybody's standing, then people ain't going to want to just hang out, right?
Yeah.
They're gonna want to show up, say their piece, get the information they need to execute their role, their job, and then leave. There's not going to be a lot of, well, I think this and I think that. What do you think? Because you know what? Those people, if you're standing there in a stand up meeting and that happens, you get people that are doing that, then, you know, they're going to get peered out, for lack of a better way of putting it, right?
Yeah, and I think that the standing is an interesting, mechanism of like, okay, hey, we got to go, just showing that. And I think the one of the things I always go back to, and this is, you already kind of joked about this. Yeah, my experience is I get to set most of the meetings, and I get to design my meetings. I've always worked in, very small teams with that. And one of the rules that I always thought was super interesting is just the like thought experiment of shrinking all of your meetings. I think we've talked about this one before. Of it's like, okay, hey, just challenging yourself of that hour-long meeting. Could you get it done in 15 minutes? And then when you start to break it down like that, you get into really the nitty-gritty of like, what are you looking to get out of the meeting? And I think talking about like different types of meetings, that's one of the keys there as well. Is what are we really looking to get out of it? When we talked about why meetings meander on so long, why we feel the need to get so many people into a meeting, it's because we want the opinions, we want the ideas, we want the camaraderie. There's all of those different aspects of it. That serves a purpose. I'm not going to say it doesn't. It is nice to have a meeting where you get everyone together and we BS a little bit, share our wins for the last couple weeks, maybe talk about some ideas, going through all of that different stuff where it's just a lot more social. That's really good. But if you set a meeting multiple times a week, especially, but if you set a meeting that's an hour long and you spend 2-3 hours on that because that's how the meeting just expands every single time, then you're disrespecting your team's time, right? And you have to recognize when it is time for the meandering meeting, the just talking social aspect of it, and when it's time to just get things done. I think that's one where it's about setting those different times for it because those different mechanisms that it fills. And then, it's just as simple as like, look at an ops thing. Like, we could do this in 30 minutes. I'm going to have an agenda. I'm going to knock this out. And I'm going to keep it at 30 minutes every single time to respect the team and respect my team's time. That being said, if we need that meandering meeting, guess what's a great thing to do Friday at 2 o'clock for a couple hours before we all call it a little early day? That's a great time because people don't have it filled with something else. And you're recognizing what it is. Same type of thing. What else serves that kind of mechanism of a lunch or a happy hour, those kind of things, right? Where you can take people, if that's the type of meeting that you want, that's what you want to get out of, that's the mechanism that you're looking for, then you can put them into that environment where it makes more sense like that. But don't expect every single meeting to be like that. I think that's where part of the issue comes, is not drawing the lines between those different types there. And I'm curious, I kind of put them into two buckets there of like the 15 minute ops, like kind of get people up to date on projects, agendas, updates, that kind of stuff. And then there's the longer meandering. Would you divide them up into some more buckets on that, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, the meandering, I would categorize that more as, all right, we need to come up with some ideas. Let's brainstorm. There's the cultural, let's hang out and just shoot the shit. There's the meandering, let's plan. We need to brainstorm how we're going to attack this problem set. There's the planning activity that's not really a meeting. We're going to plan things together. We're going to go through and develop a process. That you could call that a meeting because you're bringing more than one person together and we're collaborating together while we're doing that. But so it's, how do you define a meeting in that case? A planning meeting can be a meandering kind of open-ended thing. depending on the problem set. Uh, I think there are needs. I think here's maybe the way to do it is recurring versus non-recurring. So if you have recurring meetings that drag on, you're doing something wrong. You're not being very efficient as a leader and as an organization. So if I'm doing the same meeting every Monday at 1 o'clock, and one week it lasts for an hour, next week it lasts for 3 hours, we're doing something wrong because we're not identifying and coordinating these things in between.
Mhm.
And we need to understand, well, what's the purpose of the meeting? We always have to have a purpose for what we're doing. Why are we getting together? Why? Because, you sit around the table as a business owner and you look at all the people that we have sitting in the room, add the time and cost up. So,
Mhm.
if I'm paying that person $60, $70 an hour and that person $60, $70 an hour, and I look around the room, how much is that meeting cost me? That's one thing I've done with clients before to help them say, whoa, man, because if they're sitting in a conference room, in a meeting room, discussing things, are they doing their job? What, I mean,
No.
did you hire them to sit in meetings? If you hired somebody to sit in all the meetings, then okay, let them sit in all the meetings and keep having meetings. But if you are hired somebody to do a role and they spend 6, 7 hours a day out of a quote 8 hour workday in a meeting, how are they going to do their job?
Mhm.
You just expect them to work another 8 hours, you know? So they're working 15, 16 hour days because you're having meetings for 6, 7 hours a day. Not a great way
Mhm.
to do business.
Yeah, and I think it kind of gets into an interesting thing of like the productivity there, and the feeling the busy versus productive, which we've talked about a bunch. That aspect there. But I think so much of it is we have this value because we're meeting with people. There's like an assumed inherent value to the meeting, and so therefore those make us feel more valuable, like you were saying, of like being in the meetings and being included in that kind of aspect. But I would take that to another level of the way it fills the calendar, I think, is a little bit of a social currency. It's like, I got back-to-back meetings all day today. I go, Dad, sorry, I can't really talk right now. I got calls all day today. Well, one of those calls is with a buddy, and we're talking for an hour because we might have some business ideas that we want to work on. And it's like, okay, is that productive a meeting? It's like, no, I'm BSing with my buddy for an hour. But he also works in coaching, so technically it's on track and all those kind of things, right? And there's so many examples like that where it's like we're talking with folks, especially in the more entrepreneurial world of where it's just like, hey, here's a guy with an idea. I'm going to tell him about my idea. He's going to tell me about his idea. It's like, how productive is that meeting? But when you have that calendar that feels really full, it feels like you have that kind of a value. And what I think is so funny, and this is, of course, very entrepreneurial example for it, but looking at like my current work now, and it's kind of funny because when I have days full of calls and all that kind of stuff, and it is quite literally what you're talking about, is then days where I don't have calls, I'm actually working. Like I'm getting everything else done that I'm supposed to be doing during those other times. And so I'm kind of curious, what do you think is necessary to reshape that math a little bit of the productivity of, hey, meetings aren't productive. You shouldn't necessarily spend your whole day talking with folks. That's not, having a bunch of 8 hour calls with people that doesn't actually move your business forward is not a productive day. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the key word is it necessary? I think that's also something that you should say to yourself. Is it necessary that I'm here? Is it necessary that I say this? Is it necessary that I ask this question? And when you start to think about things in that way, is it necessary that he is in this meeting? Well, maybe, but then you do the math. Okay, is it worth the $70 an hour, $100 an hour, whatever it is to have that person there? And what's the value added? Could they answer it respond with an email? Could they provide their input early on? Yeah, you miss out on a little bit of the understanding and call it water cooler talk.
Mhm.
Uh, However, if you work your culture and you set things up this way, you can become much more efficient because now those people are doing the job you hired them to do, and they're not sitting in the conference room getting 5 minutes of value out of an hour long meeting. That's what we don't
Mhm.
want. So we want to have that efficiency. And would it make sense to have two parts? Hey, here's my part, and now I leave. Yeah, that doesn't set well for the flow of a meeting, right? Because if I
Mhm.
present something and I've given my two bits, here's my info, I'm out. That's okay once in a while, but have that as a recurrence. It interrupts the flow. All right.
Right.
So I think you have to weigh all these sort of things. And I'll go back to the really the most important part about a meeting is ask yourself, is it necessary? And what's the outcome? Why do I need Norman there? Why do I need Camden there? Why do I need Rick there? Do they, can I give them a summary that would, and the taskings afterwards that would still work? And I think when you start to think
Mhm.
about that, then I can do things much quicker, much more efficient. I know why we're all here. I know why each individual is participating. I know what information needs to be presented, and I know what decisions need to come out of it, out of that information, and I
Mhm.
know how to distribute that information after the meeting so that I don't have to have everybody sitting there taking notes. We have this really cool new technology called email that allows us to distribute the notes from a meeting to the entire team without the entire team having to sit in the room.
Mhm. I wonder. I kind of threw this out as a rule of thumb thought experiment type thing of like cutting your meeting time in a quarter. What do you think of cutting the people in a quarter? I got 10 people on here. Probably need two or three.
Oh yeah.
And just doing that as like a thought experiment inside of your own business of like, hey, we usually have all four of us in here. Really, only needs to be two of us. Let's cut two people out. See how it goes. See if the email works on that. Because I think that's one of the interesting things it is we get into the social inertia of it, where we have these meetings, so now it's like, how do I get rid of it? If we talk every Monday for 8 hours in my 8 different meetings, and I meet with everybody, and we go through all this different stuff, and they are telling me about their family, and we're going through all this different stuff. How do I tell them to shut up? How do I scale that back, kind of thing? And I'll throw that back over to you. How do you make that shift? Because that inertia is going to be the big problem for a lot of businesses.
I think as a leader, you have to make that decision and state it. This is what we're going to do. Hey, I appreciate knowing about what you did over the weekend, but that's not part of the meeting. That does. Let's talk about that when we're all having lunch together, or
Mm-hmm.
swing by my office this afternoon at 4 o'clock and let's catch up. That's different, right? But if we're talking about having a meeting and everybody's just kind of throwing random stuff out there, there's no progress made. It's just a random exchange of information. And there's a lot of good feeling about that. Oh, I know more about what Joe's doing, Terry's doing, Bob. I know about that now. But I could also read that in the situation report from his team, a summary.
Mm-hmm.
How much do I need to know? And you mentioned, having the whole team there. Well, maybe what I need to have is this department, a meeting with this department head and understand what they're doing and sit in on that. Or maybe I need to have a department head meeting and get updates from them. And then once a quarter, I step in and go to that department heads meeting. But I don't need to have everybody coming to every meeting. Boy, that is so grotesquely inefficient and ineffective.
Do you know what makes me think of now is the the rugby example I talk about a bunch when it comes to like time management and like staying focused on what the project needs and that kind of stuff. Where it's like you have your 2 hour practice. There's questions a lot of time, or rabbit holes we could dive in talking about all sorts of different things. Whether it's a player's question, me with another coach, whatever that is, and we could dive in and we could spend 3 hours talking about it. But we're in the middle of this 2 hour practice where we have 30 seconds to talk about this, and I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to keep us on track there. And I think the interesting thing there is for most people that works. Most questions wind up getting resolved. As you kind of force things into that structure, most things usually work. And you know what happens when somebody really doesn't get something and they say, hey, coach, I don't get my body position in the ruck here. I'm not really sure. What am I doing with my hands when I'm in the – it doesn't make sense. You say hit with the shoulder, but then I'm supposed to be using my hands. What am I doing? All this kind of stuff. Well, just like people have the different, different ways of learning, different learning styles, that you may need to help some of those people with it. The person, whether it's, your kind of example of like talk about their weekend and that kind of stuff, catch on life, or, something that's more pertinent to work itself and diving in on it. If it's an extra thing, treat it like the extra thing. Hey, talk to me after practice. And I think that value of talk to me after practice is really, really important, because just like in the meeting, I'm holding the line. It is, hey, we got to keep moving on this. We got to keep moving on this. I'm keeping us on track. We're keeping this meeting to 20 minutes, by God. I'm not letting it go over. That kind of thing. And it's, hey, coach, can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? Hey, boss, can I talk with you? Not right now. We're doing this. And talk to me after practice. Talk to me after work. And you know what happens? When they come to me after practice, I'll talk with them for hours. They're trying to get rid of me, because now I'm open. And now it's like, oh, now I don't have to respect that time anymore. Now we are open and we're just talking, right? And once you're in that point, that's what they're looking for too, right? Is to have that honest dialogue, to dive deeper, ask all those kind of questions. And it's about creating that separate time for it again. So maybe for folks, it's, maybe that's the other rule you add in. You take this 25% reduction as a rule of thumb and just try to trim things out. And if things don't fit and people keep coming, hey, come by my office after 5 o'clock. I'll be there. And just plan on finishing work at 5. And it's like, hey, I'm here till I'm done answering questions. And, as you kind of build that in, again, it goes back to what we were talking about of like, what is the mechanism? What is the action that you're looking to get out of this meeting? And you just have to make sure you're replicating that somewhere else. We talked about like the kind of the value of like the meandering kind of wandering meeting, right? Well, if you create space for that, like a lunch where you're talking a little bit more BSing, or a brainstorming session, all those kind of things, well, then you now have created another space for it. So you still have that value, but you're saving a lot of your team's time by keeping those meetings a bit shorter. And I also want to pat ourselves on the back, because I know we're doing a shorter podcast today. We did not plan that as much, but it is a nice exercise as well. Same kind of thing. What happens on a podcast? We talk about Spin and Chicklets and Paul Bissonnette when he goes on NHL on TNT. And the first year or two, what they keep saying, Biz, you're not on a podcast. You got to shut up, man. Commercial. We got a commercial. We got to go. We got to go. And what is really funny for us to watch, and especially as podcasters, we can relate to it a bit, that you could just kind of keep talking. And that's exactly what happens in meetings, is you just, start exchanging monologues, and it just goes and goes and goes. And you got to have a little bit of that experiment of like, hey, let's keep this one to 30 minutes. I bet you I could jam the information in there. Because just like coaching something, going back to my coaching example, if you asked me how to pass a rugby ball, how long do you think I need to coach some random person to pass a rugby ball? Hour, maybe, going full in depth on it. How long do you think I could talk about passing a rugby ball, catch, pass? Come on. I'll be out there all day. Right? Come on. Easily. But when you hold yourself to the timeline, you coach more efficiently. And I could get somebody in and out 15 minutes, and they, it'd be the elephant trunk kind of pass, get their W's up, all that kind of stuff. I get that done in 15 minutes, and we're on to the next thing. And recognizing that you as the leader, you need to be more efficient with those things, and challenging yourself to be more efficient, because then it opens up that room for other opportunities. And the other thing I would add is, when you're more efficient with that kind of stuff, the teaching, the planning, those aspects of meeting, well, then it opens you up for the kind of X factor value, which is the meandering meeting, the water cooler kind of stuff, the more random things there. So that's kind of my takeaway there. I would think that the rule of thumb that I keep going back to is that 25%, just challenging yourself to just slice those meetings in half, slice them in quarter, and just see how much more efficient you can be. Because then the trick is, if you're going to wait, let's say it was an hour-long meeting and you're wasting all that extra time, and you make it a 15-minute meeting, but you go 5 minutes over, you still just save 40 minutes. And I think that's the really important way to look at it.
I agree, and I'd use one more rugby analogy in the ruck. How many guys do you need in the ruck? you know, think about your meetings like that, right? Do you really need all 15 people in the ruck, or can you get away with maybe 2, 3? So think about that as a continued rugby analogy. And, to poke fun at you on what I learned, just a little bit is you're young enough, naive enough to not have experienced the bureaucracy of those meetings. Even in the military, we had meetings that were just like, really, why the hell am I here? Why am I sitting in this meeting, boss? Sort of thing. Even in the military,
Yeah.
and in the business world, it doesn't just cost you time, but it costs you money too. So make sure that the people that you have in the meeting are necessary to be in the meeting. I think that's the question that you should ask yourself. Camden, what'd you learn?
And I'll just add on that, just like that ruck example, and how many do you need? Well, you should challenge yourself for less and less. If you look at, without going down the full rabbit hole of some USA rugby, but we were talking about their game last week against Romania. Well, yeah, you can put 3 people in a tackle, probably put 1. And you should probably challenge yourself to always have 1. You should probably challenge yourself to always have less people in the meeting. And sometimes you're going to need more. Sometimes there's a pile of bodies in that ruck, Dad, and you can't get away. But it happens, right? Sometimes you got 6 guys from each team, and it's this huge pile, and that's what the game needs. But usually it doesn't. So the err on the side of less. I love that. For me, I think it was the value that people feel by being in the meeting. That's one variable I hadn't really thought of too much. Of like, not necessarily like the lack of trust that I had mentioned. That was kind of intuitive to me. Of the idea of like, if I'm not in this meeting, they're going to screw up my plan and they're going to mess up my project. They're going to take away my credit. All that kind of stuff. I could wrap my head around that. But just the idea that like, I am confirmed as valuable to this team because I'm in that meeting. Of like, wait, what, the bosses are meeting and they didn't call me? Me? Like, what? I don't have value. It's this kind of weird ego thing there, but it makes sense because, people have that ego. People want to feel valued inside the organization. And that is in a very superficial way, of course, but that is a way that kind of checks that box. Hey, you have value. You were in the meeting. And that's it. And, I hadn't really seen that before. So I thank you for that one too, Dad.
Awesome. All right. So go to 10xyourteam.net and learn about how to lead yourself and lead your team. Got 2 great programs. Plus, you can watch more of the videos from 10x Your Team. Camden, run us out.
Gosh, cut that CTA in less than a quarter. Well done, Dad. Very impressive, very impressive. Thank y'all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes is available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.